What if every second ticking on your clock is not a universal truth, but a localized illusion? For centuries, ancient star charts etched into Sumerian clay tablets and the meticulously crafted Antikythera mechanism from ancient Greece operated on one absolute assumption: time flows identically for everything, everywhere. Isaac Newton built the foundation of modern physics on this exact premise, cementing the human belief in a rigid, ticking clockwork universe. Yet, historical anomalies began to surface in our observations. Subtle, unexplained shifts in the orbit of Mercury defied the greatest mathematical minds of the early 20th century, leaving a lingering doubt that our understanding of reality was deeply flawed. The unsettling promise of truth we will uncover is that time is not an untouchable, invisible river. It is a physical structure, a fragile fabric that can be stretched, manipulated, and entirely broken by extreme mass. Out in the cold expanses of the cosmos exist massive cosmic engines designed to shatter this very fabric. When one stands at the precipice of a black hole, the ticking clock stops being a simple measure of passing moments and becomes a heavy, physical weight, stretching one single hour into 7 years of planetary history. We are going to decode the extreme physics waiting at the event horizon, utilizing the core principles of general relativity without the barriers of complex mathematics, to understand the exact mechanisms of severe gravitational time dilation. Welcome to Dozing Universe. I am here holding space for your curiosity, wrapping you in the quiet comfort of the night while we drift into the unknown together. If you find peace in exploring the deepest mysteries of the void, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and let the darkness speak. Long before the concept of black holes existed, or the mathematics of extreme gravity were ever written, humanity looked upward to find order in an otherwise chaotic world. The earliest civilizations recognized that survival depended on predicting the future, and so they became meticulous observers of the sky. The ancient Egyptians utilized the steady dripping of water clocks, known as clepsydras, to divide the darkness into measurable hours, while Babylonian astronomers carved their detailed planetary diaries into clay tablets, tracking the predictable cycles of the moon and stars. Time, to our ancestors, was an absolute master. It was the ultimate, unyielding metronome, dictating the passing of seasons, the rise and fall of empires, and the inevitable decay of all living things. Sir Isaac Newton formalized this intuitive human belief in the 17th century, declaring unequivocally that time was an absolute entity, flowing evenly and constantly forward without any relation to the external world. Under this Newtonian worldview, the universe operated like an infinitely large, flawless grandfather clock. A second measured on the surface of the Earth was considered exactly identical to a second measured on the most distant, burning star. This rigid framework brought a profound sense of psychological comfort to early physicists. It provided a stable, unchanging stage upon which the grand drama of the cosmos could unfold in perfectly predictable mathematical harmony. However, the universe rarely adheres to the boundaries of human comfort. The first structural cracks in this flawless cosmic clockwork did not emerge from the deep, uncharted void of space, but rather from our own solar neighborhood. By the middle of the 19th century, astronomers were charting the movements of the planets with unprecedented precision. The brilliant French mathematician Urbain Le Verrier, who had previously discovered the planet Neptune simply by studying gravitational anomalies, turned his attention to Mercury. The closest planet to the Sun was not following the exact elliptical path dictated by Newton. Its orbit was shifting, tracing a shape like the overlapping petals of a rosette over decades. The mathematical predictions were off by a tiny, yet undeniably persistent, fraction of a degree. For decades, the global scientific community scrambled to protect the absolute clockwork model of the universe. They hypothesized the existence of an unseen planet named Vulcan, hidden in the glare of the sun, theorizing that its invisible gravitational tug was responsible for the anomaly. Observatories around the world spent years hunting for this phantom planet, yet no matter how carefully they searched, Vulcan was never found. The orbit of Mercury remained a glaring, silent rebellion against the absolute nature of the universe. The classical foundation of rigid space and universal time was fundamentally broken, waiting for a mind willing to discard the comfortable illusion of the ticking clock. The resolution required humanity to completely abandon the idea of space as an empty, passive room, and time as an invisible, universal metronome. To comprehend the reality of what extreme gravity does to time, we must first approach the universe through a completely different architectural blueprint, a framework known as spacetime. We must understand that space and time are not independent entities that merely coexist. They are physically woven together into a single, active, four-dimensional fabric that dictates the movement of everything within it. It is naturally difficult for a human mind, evolved to navigate a three-dimensional world, to visualize a four-dimensional construct. Yet, the physical behavior of space-time can be understood by observing the mechanics of flexible surfaces. Consider a large, tightly stretched sheet of highly elastic fabric suspended horizontally in the air. If you roll a small, lightweight marble across this flat, undisturbed surface, it travels in a perfectly straight line. This pristine state represents empty space, regions of the cosmos far away from any massive stars or planets, where the fabric is flat and time flows at its maximum, baseline rate. Now, introduce a massive, solid iron cannonball directly into the center of that elastic sheet. The sheer mass of the iron sphere forces the fabric to stretch, warp, and sink downward, creating a deep, curved depression in the surrounding material. This physical curving of the fabric is the true nature of what we experience as gravity. The heavy object does not reach out with a mysterious, invisible force to pull smaller objects toward it. Instead, the heavy object simply warps the environment around it. When you attempt to roll the small marble across this altered surface, the straight path is no longer physically available. The marble is forced to follow the curved slope of the depression, circling inward toward the massive center. Gravity, therefore, is simply the geometry of this warped space. The celestial bodies in our universe are not suspended in an empty void. They rest heavily upon this flexible, invisible grid. The sun rests like a massive weight upon the fabric of our solar system, creating a deep gravitational well. The historical anomaly in the orbit of Mercury occurred simply because the planet is sitting so deep within the steep, severely curved depression created by the mass of the sun. Newton could not account for this because his mathematics assumed the stage was perfectly flat. Crucially, this fabric is not merely a grid of physical distances. It is a grid of space and time intertwined. Where the fabric stretches downward under the weight of a star or a planet, the physical measurement of space is distorted, and consequently, the flow of time itself is forcibly stretched. Mass bends time exactly as physical pressure bends the elastic sheet. The deeper the indentation in the fabric, the more severe the stretching of time becomes. When a physical clock is placed deep within this gravitational well, the mechanical ticking of its gears, the vibration of its quartz crystals, and the biological aging of human cells must all fight their way through this stretched, distorted reality. A single second becomes physically longer. The universe does not possess a master clock ticking at a uniform, universal speed. Instead, time is entirely local, dictated solely by the mass of the objects nearby and the specific depth of the gravitational sinkhole one happens to occupy. This localized reality reveals that time is fragile, setting the necessary stage for a dramatic, terrifying confrontation when the mass becomes so extreme that the fabric of reality itself reaches its ultimate breaking point. The radical proposition that time and space were a single, pliable fabric remained isolated within the realm of theoretical mathematics for years. The equations of general relativity were elegant, yet they demanded a physical demonstration that seemed practically impossible to achieve from the surface of our small planet. To prove that mass could physically bend the structure of the universe, humanity needed a cosmic alignment of extraordinary proportions. The historical context surrounding this pursuit adds a layer of profound human struggle to the scientific endeavor. It was 1919, and the world was barely beginning to recover from the devastating global trauma of the First World War. Nationalistic divisions were deeply entrenched across continents, yet the pursuit of cosmic truth compelled Arthur Eddington, a British astronomer, to test the bizarre theory proposed by a German physicist. The expedition was not a simple laboratory experiment. It was a grueling physical journey to the remote island of Principe, located off the western coast of Africa. Eddington and his team carried heavy, fragile photographic glass plates, delicate clockwork mechanisms for their telescopes, and the heavy burden of scientific skepticism. They were hunting for a fleeting, temporary shadow. A total solar eclipse was the only natural mechanism capable of blocking the overwhelming, blinding glare of our sun. Only under the cover of this sudden, unnatural daytime darkness could the faint, ancient light of distant stars positioned directly behind the sun become visible to human instruments. The premise of the experiment was beautifully simple, yet its implications were terrifying for classical physics. If the new theory of spacetime held true, the enormous mass of the sun would create a deep, severe depression in the fabric of the universe. The light traveling from the distant Hyades star cluster, traversing the cold vacuum for countless centuries, would not travel in a perfectly straight Euclidean line as it passed our local star. Instead, it would dip into this gravitational valley, curving along the warped, invisible contours of space before finally reaching the fragile lenses on Earth. On a humid afternoon in May, heavy clouds initially threatened to obscure the sky, building a tense atmosphere of potential failure. But as the moon slid perfectly into position, matching the exact apparent diameter of the solar disk, the clouds fractured. In those few precious minutes of totality, the temperature dropped, the winds died down, and Eddington captured the starlight grazing the very edge of the sun. Months later, when the photographic plates were developed, measured, and meticulously analyzed under microscopes, the results sent a shockwave through the scientific community. The positions of the stars were visibly displaced from their known, true coordinates in the night sky. The starlight had been bent. This was not an optical illusion caused by atmospheric distortion. It was the physical manifestation of warped space. The celestial bodies were not tethered by invisible ropes of attractive force. They were silently tracing the curved geometry of a bent universe. This single, undeniable observation shifted the entire foundation of human knowledge. It confirmed that gravity is geometry. However, the acceptance of warped space carried a heavy, unavoidable consequence that many struggled to process. Because space and time are fundamentally woven together into the single fabric of spacetime, one cannot distort the spatial dimensions without simultaneously stretching the temporal dimension. If the physical distance a beam of light must travel is curved and stretched by the mass of a star, the steady flow of time itself must be equally compromised. To observe this manipulation of time, we no longer need to wait for a rare celestial alignment or stare into the deep, distant cosmos. The empirical proof hovers silently above our heads every single day, forming the hidden backbone of our modern technological existence. Orbiting approximately 20,000 kilometers above the surface of the Earth is a complex constellation of satellites that form the Global Positioning System. These machines do not merely transmit geographic coordinates. Their primary function is to broadcast highly precise time signals utilizing onboard atomic clocks. These devices are the most accurate timekeeping mechanisms ever constructed by human hands, measuring the steady, predictable decay and vibration of specific atoms. These satellites, however, are operating in a drastically different physical environment than the devices we carry in our pockets. Resting here on the surface of the Earth, human beings, buildings, and surface-level clocks are submerged deep within the gravitational well created by the concentrated mass of our planet. The satellites, soaring high in the cold, frictionless vacuum of medium Earth orbit, experience a significantly weaker gravitational pull. They are floating much closer to the flat, undisturbed baseline of the space-time fabric. Because these orbital machines exist in a region where the geometry of reality is less stretched by planetary mass, their atomic clocks physically tick faster than identical clocks resting on the ground. The difference is incredibly small, amounting to roughly 38 microseconds per day. It is a fraction of a second, so minuscule that biological human perception cannot detect it. Yet it is undeniably real, and crucially, it is cumulative. The atoms inside the orbital clocks vibrate at a different rate simply because time itself is passing at a different rate. The clocks are not broken. It is the absolute nature of time that is broken. If aerospace engineers did not program the satellite computers to artificially slow down their internal ticking, constantly compensating for this exact gravitational time dilation, the entire global navigation grid would completely fail within a matter of hours. The pinpoint accuracy required to map a daily commute or guide a commercial airliner would drift by several kilometers by the end of a single day. The technology governing our modern logistics operates entirely on the proven mathematical reality that time is a malleable physical substance, bending slightly under the relatively weak weight of the Earth. A second measured in orbit is physically distinct from a second measured on the ground. We are already living inside a subtle time machine, navigating the gentle ripples of a warped reality without ever noticing the distortion. This realization demands a cold, logical extrapolation. The Earth is a remarkably insignificant speck of rock in the grand, violent architecture of the cosmos. Its mass is barely enough to cause a microscopic dimple in the fabric of space-time. Yet that tiny dimple is powerful enough to desynchronize atomic structures and alter the flow of seconds. This localized, everyday phenomenon forces a chilling line of questioning. The universe contains structures far more massive and dense than our pale blue dot. There are dead stellar remnants constructed of pure, degenerate neutron matter, where a single teaspoon of material weighs as much as an entire terrestrial mountain range. There are hypergiant stars burning with the furious intensity of millions of suns, distorting the space around them on a massive scale. If a tiny rocky sphere can stretch time by a fraction of a microsecond, the consequences must be magnified to terrifying extremes when the mass involved is multiplied by millions or billions. The mathematical framework of general relativity does not impose a polite safety limit on this distortion. It suggests a mechanical trajectory leading toward an ultimate, catastrophic breaking point. When a massive dying star finally exhausts its internal nuclear fuel, the outward pressure of fusion ceases, and it collapses inward under its own crushing, inescapable weight. It condenses an incomprehensible amount of matter into a vanishingly small volume, causing the gentle gravitational depression to steepen into a bottomless, sheer-walled abyss. The fabric of spacetime in these regions is not merely stretched, it is violently punctured. The gentle curving of ancient starlight and the subtle drifting of satellite clocks are merely the faint whispers of a force that, taken to its absolute limit, prepares the stage for an encounter with the most extreme cosmic anomaly in the dark. It is a place where the familiar rules of existence are completely rewritten, and time itself ceases to be a gentle river, hardening instead into an inescapable physical prison. The vocabulary we use to describe the cosmos often betrays our profound misunderstanding of its true nature. The very term we assign to the most extreme objects in the universe is a linguistic trap. Calling it a black hole implies an emptiness, a hollow void, or a cosmic drain swirling at the bottom of the space-time fabric. The physical reality is the exact, terrifying opposite. It is not an absence of matter. It is the ultimate, uncompromising concentration of it. It is the final tomb of a massive star, a region where a staggering amount of physical material has been crushed into an impossibly small volume, creating a gravitational pull so violent that it shatters the fundamental rules of reality. To understand how such an extreme mechanism operates and how it eventually breaks the flow of time, we must first trace the difficult historical journey humanity took to even admit that such monsters could exist. The concept did not begin in modern observatories or in the complex tensor calculus of the 20th century. It began as a quiet, almost forgotten thought experiment in the late 18th century, born from the mind of an unassuming English clergyman named John Michell. In 1783, Michell looked at the night sky and applied Isaac Newton's established laws of gravity to light itself. He reasoned through a concept known as escape velocity, the minimum speed required for any object to break free from the gravitational grip of a celestial body. On Earth, a rocket must accelerate to roughly 11 kilometers per second to escape the atmosphere and enter the void. If the Earth were more massive, that required speed would increase. Michell pushed this logic to its absolute, monstrous extreme. He calculated what would happen if a star were incredibly massive and unimaginably dense. So much so that its escape velocity exceeded the speed of light itself. If light, the fastest entity in the universe, could not muster the speed to break free, then such a star would emit no illumination. It would be entirely invisible against the dark backdrop of space. Michell called these hypothetical entities dark stars. It was a profound stroke of deductive reasoning, yet the scientific community of the era largely ignored it. The idea seemed too absurd, an unnecessary mathematical ghost with no basis in observable reality. For more than a century, the dark star remained a forgotten footnote in the archives of astronomy. Even when the mathematical framework of general relativity emerged decades later, providing the exact blueprints for how extreme mass could infinitely curve spacetime, the architects of modern physics violently resisted the conclusion. The human mind naturally rejects the concept of absolute infinity, and the greatest scientific minds were no exception. There was a deeply held philosophical belief that nature must possess an underlying fail-safe, an undiscovered physical law that would prevent matter from collapsing entirely in on itself. During the 1930s, a brilliant young astrophysicist named Subrahmanyan Chandrasekhar mathematically proved that white dwarf stars above a certain mass could not support their own weight and would continue to collapse. His conclusion was publicly and aggressively ridiculed by Arthur Eddington, the very man who had proven relativity during the solar eclipse. Eddington simply refused to accept that a star could shrink into a mathematical point, declaring that there must be a law of nature to prevent a star from behaving in such an absurd manner. The idea of total gravitational collapse was treated as an ugly mathematical artifact, a glitch in the equations that scientists hoped would eventually be resolved and erased. The universe, however, has no obligation to conform to human expectations or mathematical comfort. The theoretical ghost began to materialize into terrifying reality in the latter half of the 20th century. Since the atmosphere of the Earth blocks most incoming X-ray radiation, astronomers began launching Geiger counters on suborbital rockets to peer at the high-energy universe. In 1964, they detected a massive, furious source of X-rays emanating from the constellation Cygnus. Over the following years, observations narrowed this source down to a binary star system named Cygnus X1. Telescopes revealed a massive blue supergiant star locked in a rapid, deadly orbital waltz. The star was violently whipping around an invisible companion. Based on the orbital dynamics, the unseen partner had a mass roughly 15 times greater than our Sun, packed into a space smaller than a small asteroid. It was far too massive to be a neutron star or a white dwarf. The invisible companion was tearing a stream of superheated gas from the blue supergiant, accelerating it to near light speed, and heating it to millions of degrees, causing it to scream into the void in the form of X-rays before vanishing entirely. The mathematical glitch was real, and it was actively feeding in the dark. To comprehend the anatomy of the entity that was devouring the blue supergiant, we must strip away our intuitive understanding of physical objects. A black hole is constructed of two primary components, neither of which is a solid surface you could touch. At the absolute center lies the singularity. When a massive star finally exhausts its nuclear fuel, the outward pressure that has supported it for millions of years simply stops. Gravity, the most relentless force in the universe, instantly wins the final battle. The entire mass of the stellar core rushes inward at a significant fraction of the speed of light. The crushing weight overcomes the repulsive forces between atoms, then between the nuclei, until protons and electrons are smashed together and destroyed. But the collapse does not stop. All that mass continues to shrink past the size of a city, past the size of a marble, past the size of a single atom. It compresses until the concept of physical size loses all meaning. The singularity is a coordinate in space-time, where matter is crushed to infinite density, and the curvature of the space-time fabric becomes infinite. It is not an object in the traditional sense. It is a profound tear in the canvas of reality. It is an error message in the laws of physics, the exact location where our current understanding of mathematics utterly breaks down and ceases to function. Surrounding this infinitely dense point is the second critical component, the perimeter, known as the event horizon. This is the feature that gives the phenomenon its defining characteristic and its dark reputation. The event horizon is not a crust, a shell, or a physical barrier. It is purely a mathematical threshold, an invisible sphere of influence drawn around the singularity. It represents the exact radius at which the escape velocity perfectly equals the speed of light. Outside this boundary, the gravitational pull is incredibly fierce. But if you have enough energy and speed, you can still theoretically escape its grip. The moment you slip inside the event horizon, that possibility drops to absolute zero. Because nothing in the universe can travel faster than light, nothing can cross back out. It is the ultimate cosmic turnstile, a one-way membrane in the fabric of spacetime. Any light that crosses this boundary is trapped forever, bending back inward toward the singularity. This makes the event horizon the absolute limit of observation. It is a perfect, flawless shadow cast upon the universe. Whatever happens inside the event horizon stays permanently locked away, forever severed from the rest of the cosmos. This invisible boundary is the exact precipice where the flow of time faces its greatest, most catastrophic distortion. To understand the true magnitude of this gravitational abyss, we must examine its interaction with the most fundamental absolute in the universe, the speed of light. Outside the absolute boundary of the event horizon, there exists a chaotic, violently distorted environment where the fundamental geometry of space has been stretched to its absolute physical limit. When we look out into the night sky, we naturally assume that the light reaching our eyes from distant stars has traveled in a straight, uninterrupted line through the vacuum of space. However, when starlight passes near the staggering mass of a black hole, the deep depression in the space-time fabric acts as an incredibly powerful cosmic magnifying glass. This phenomenon, known as gravitational lensing, warps the trajectory of the passing photons. If a beam of light passes at a safe distance, it is merely deflected, bending slightly along the curved contours of space before continuing its journey. But as light approaches closer to the event horizon, the curvature of the fabric becomes so incredibly steep that the path of the light is radically altered. At a very specific boundary, located just outside the event horizon, the gravity is so precisely balanced that the photons are neither sucked into the void nor allowed to escape into the wider universe. Instead, they are caught in an eternal, precarious orbit. This delicate region is known as the photon sphere. Here, light itself is forced to circle the black hole exactly like planets orbiting a star. The implications of this physical reality are deeply unsettling. If an observer could somehow hover within this exact spherical boundary, the light reflecting off the back of their own head would travel entirely around the circumference of the black hole and strike their eyes from the front. They would effectively be staring at their own past, trapped in a continuous optical loop. Yet, this photon sphere is profoundly unstable. The slightest perturbation, a microscopic shift in energy, will either send the light ray spiraling outward into the cosmos or plunging downward across the event horizon, never to be seen again. Because the black hole traps any light that crosses its threshold, the object itself is inherently invisible. It is a perfect, flawless void. The only way humanity could ever hope to witness such an entity is not by looking for the object itself, but by observing the catastrophic effect it has on the surrounding physical matter. As the black hole exerts its immense gravitational pull on nearby stars and interstellar gas, it strips this material away, drawing it inward. Because everything in the universe possesses some degree of angular momentum, this stolen matter does not simply fall straight down into the singularity. Instead, it spirals inward, forming a massive, flattened structure known as an accretion disk. The mechanics of this disk represent one of the most violent physical processes in nature. As the gas and dust swirl closer to the event horizon, the material is compressed and accelerated to an appreciable fraction of the speed of light. The internal friction generated by microscopic particles violently colliding at such extreme velocities generates an astronomical amount of heat. The accretion disk ignites into a blindingly luminous plasma, reaching temperatures of millions of degrees and radiating intense energy across the electromagnetic spectrum. This glowing disk provides the critical backlight necessary to illuminate the dark silhouette of the black hole. However, because the space-time fabric is so severely warped, the visual appearance of this disk is drastically distorted to a distant observer. The light emitted from the portion of the disk located behind the black hole does not travel in a straight line toward the observer. Instead, the intense gravity grabs that light and bends it completely over the top and beneath the bottom of the event horizon. This creates the optical illusion of a continuous glowing ring of light surrounding a central region of absolute darkness. That central darkness is the shadow of the black hole. It is a literal absence of photons, a region where the gravitational pull has successfully conquered the fastest entity in existence. For decades, this entire visual description existed purely as a theoretical model, a mathematical prediction generated by supercomputers attempting to simulate the extreme equations of general relativity. It was widely believed that humanity would never actually see this phenomenon. The nearest supermassive black holes are located millions of light years away, and their angular size in the sky is so infinitesimally small that resolving an image of their shadow would be equivalent to standing in New York and attempting to read the date on a small coin located in Paris. No single telescope on Earth possessed the necessary resolution to achieve such an impossible feat. The solution required a triumph of human ingenuity and international collaboration that rivaled the initial discovery of warped space. In the 2010s, a global consortium of astronomers linked together 8 distinct radio observatories scattered across the globe, from the high-altitude deserts of Chile to the frozen expanse of the South Pole. Through a technique known as very long baseline interferometry, they synchronized these disparate telescopes using highly precise atomic clocks, effectively transforming the entire planet Earth into a single, massive virtual telescope. They aimed this planetary eye at the center of Messier 87, a massive elliptical galaxy located 55 million light-years away in the constellation Virgo. At the heart of this distant galaxy lay a supermassive black hole containing the mass of 6.5 billion suns. The data collection was immense. Over several nights in April of 2017, the telescopes gathered so much raw digital information that it could not be transmitted over the internet. Petabytes of data had to be stored on physical hard drives and flown on commercial airplanes to centralized supercomputers for processing. It took 2 years of meticulous calibration, algorithmic analysis, and rigorous verification to stitch the data together. On April 10, 2019, the world was presented with the very first direct visual evidence of a black hole. The image was exactly as the mathematics had coldly predicted a century prior. It revealed a bright, asymmetrical ring of orange and yellow light, glowing fiercely against the blackness of space, surrounding a distinct circular shadow. The asymmetry of the ring, the fact that the bottom portion appeared significantly brighter than the top, was a direct consequence of a phenomenon known as Doppler beaming. The superheated plasma in the accretion disk was rotating toward Earth on one side, intensifying its light, while the material on the opposite side was rotating away, causing its light to dim. This blurry, slightly out-of-focus photograph was not merely a beautiful astronomical picture. It was a profound physical validation. It proved, beyond any reasonable doubt, that the ultimate gravitational extreme was not a mathematical error. The shadow was real. The monstrous concentration of mass was actively bending the path of starlight, forcing the universe to warp around its immense physical presence. Let us consider the profound scale of the entity captured in that historic photograph. The supermassive black hole at the center of Messier 87 is not merely a stellar remnant, it is a cosmic leviathan. Its mass is so gargantuan that its event horizon is large enough to engulf our entire solar system well beyond the orbit of Neptune. The dark shadow visible in the center of the glowing ring spans a distance of roughly 40 billion kilometers across. When humanity looked at that image, we were gazing into an abyss of unimaginable proportions. Furthermore, the light captured by the Event Horizon Telescope had been traveling through the empty void of space for 55 million years. Those specific photons began their journey shortly after the extinction of the dinosaurs on Earth, narrowly escaping the gravitational grip of the black hole, traversing the vast intergalactic medium, and finally striking the radio dishes on our planet. This immense journey underscores the sheer persistence of light, yet it also highlights the terrifying power of the object left behind. If photons, possessing such incredible velocity and endurance, can be completely subdued and permanently imprisoned by the gravity of the event horizon, the implications for any physical matter possessing mass are absolute and uncompromising. The capture of this image fundamentally altered our relationship with the unknown. For decades, the black hole was a theoretical ghost, an abstract concept discussed entirely through the safety of mathematical equations on a blackboard. The photograph transformed the abstract into the concrete. It proved that the universe contains regions where the familiar laws of physics, the reliable, intuitive rules that govern our daily existence, are completely overthrown by the sheer force of gravity. The glowing ring serves as a stark, undeniable boundary marker. It is a cosmic warning sign indicating the exact perimeter where reality fractures. Because the gravitational pull is so intense that it forces light to orbit in circles and creates a permanent shadow in the fabric of the universe, we are forced to confront the inescapable reality of what this environment does to the progression of time. The two are inextricably linked. The fabric of spacetime cannot be torn in one dimension without tearing the other. Where the space is warped tightly enough to ensnare a photon, the timeline is stretched severely enough to trap a second. The visual confirmation of the black hole shadow is, therefore, the visual confirmation of severe gravitational time dilation. It is the undeniable proof that extreme mass possesses the mechanical ability to seize the flow of time and stretch it into something entirely unrecognizable. This sets the stage for a descent into the true madness of the abyss, where the mechanical ticking of a clock is no longer an abstract measurement, but a physical weight anchoring the observer to a reality that is slowly, irreversibly slipping away. To truly grasp the horror and the majesty of what occurs at the edge of the abyss, we must systematically dismantle the most stubborn illusion woven into the human psyche. The concept of a shared present. Our entire existence on this planet is built upon the comforting assumption that now is a universal state of being. We believe that as a second ticks away in our local room, that exact same second is ticking away in the deepest trenches of the ocean, on the dusty surface of the moon, and in the swirling storms of distant galaxies. This collective agreement of time allows us to synchronize our lives, write our histories, and predict our futures. Yet, the moment a physical body begins its descent toward the event horizon of a supermassive black hole, this collective agreement is violently revoked. The fabric of spacetime, which gently undulates under the weight of ordinary stars and planets, plunges into a near vertical chasm. As an object moves deeper into this extreme gravitational well, it is not merely traveling through space, it is physically wading through an increasingly dense, stretched medium of reality. Gravity here ceases to be a simple attractive pull. It becomes a thick, suffocating physical constraint acting upon the very machinery of existence. To understand the mechanics of this extreme time dilation without relying on the abstract language of mathematical equations, we must look at the fundamental physical nature of a clock. A clock, regardless of its design, is simply a device that measures movement across a specific distance. A traditional grandfather clock relies on the physical swing of a heavy brass pendulum. A modern wristwatch relies on the rapid, predictable vibration of a microscopic quartz crystal. A human being is, in essence, a complex biological clock. Our perception of time is dictated by the rhythmic beating of the heart, the steady pumping of blood through arteries, the predictable decay of cellular structures, and the rapid firing of electrical synapses across the neural pathways of the brain. Every single one of these processes, from the ticking of a gear to the firing of a neuron, requires physical movement through space. When the immense, concentrated mass of the black hole physically stretches the fabric of spacetime, the actual, literal distance that these particles must traverse is stretched along with it. The space between the atoms in the quartz crystal is elongated by the gravitational distortion. The physical space within the neural pathways of the human brain is subjected to the exact same warping. Therefore, for an action to complete its cycle, for the pendulum to swing, for the crystal to vibrate, or for the heart to pump one single beat, the components must travel through a distorted, elongated geometry. The process physically takes longer to occur. This is not an optical illusion, nor is it a psychological trick played upon the mind. It is a fundamental mechanical slowing down of physical reality itself. Yet the true psychological terror of this phenomenon lies in the absolute, inescapable normalcy of the local experience. The fundamental principle of relativity dictates that the laws of physics must remain consistent for anyone within their own local frame of reference. For an astronaut enclosed in a reinforced capsule, slowly descending toward the absolute boundary of the event horizon, the internal reality remains perfectly, terrifyingly mundane. If you were sitting in that chair, staring at the chronometer strapped to your wrist, you would notice absolutely nothing out of the ordinary. The second hand would tick forward with the exact same familiar, steady rhythm you have known your entire life. Your heart would beat at a normal resting rate. If you poured a cup of water, the liquid would flow and splash exactly as it does on Earth. If you engaged in a conversation, your thoughts would form at a normal speed, and your words would leave your mouth without any sluggishness. Because your brain, your heart, your clock, and the space immediately surrounding you are all being stretched by the exact same gravitational ratio, your local perception of time remains flawlessly intact. Within your isolated bubble of reality, 1 second is still exactly 1 second. You feel no physical resistance, no thickening of the air, no sudden heaviness in the passage of the moments. The trap is completely invisible to the one caught within it. The profound divergence of reality only reveals itself when we introduce a second frame of reference, an observer stationed far away from the black hole, floating in the safe, flat, undisturbed expanse of deep space. If this distant observer were looking through an incredibly powerful telescope, tracking your descent toward the dark, the laws of relativity dictate a visual and chronological nightmare. The observer is existing in a region where the space-time fabric is taut and unstretched. Their clocks are running at the maximum baseline speed allowed by the universe. When they look down into the deep, warped gravity well at your descending capsule, they do not see a localized bubble of normalcy. They see the physical stretching of your reality in stark contrast to their own. Through their lens, the mechanical slowing of your existence is glaringly obvious. They would see your physical movements become incredibly sluggish, as if you were moving through invisible hardening resin. The steady, normal heartbeat you feel in your chest would appear to them as a terrifyingly slow, agonizingly delayed pulse, with minutes or even hours passing between each individual beat. If they could see the clock on your wrist, the second hand would appear to be entirely frozen, taking an eternity to travel from one tiny marker to the next. This is the exact juncture where the ratio of 1 hour to 7 years ceases to be a science fiction concept and becomes a crushing, mathematical reality of orbital mechanics. As you draw closer to the absolute edge, the curvature of spacetime steepens exponentially, and the chronological divergence becomes catastrophically wide. For every single hour that passes normally inside your descending capsule, an hour you spend breathing at a normal rate, experiencing 60 standard minutes of conscious thought, the distant universe floating in flat space experiences 7 full years of uninterrupted history. This exchange rate is not a limit, it is merely a milestone on the way down. The closer you shave the edge of the event horizon, the more severe the penalty becomes. It shifts from 1 hour equaling 7 years to 1 hour equaling a century, then a millennium. The chronological tether that connects you to the rest of the human race is not just stretched, it is completely severed. You are effectively purchasing a few fleeting moments of local existence at the cost of entire epochs in the outside world. The profound tragedy of this physical law is the absolute isolation it enforces. You are fully alive, fully conscious, and existing in what feels like a normal present. But your present has been completely detached from the timeline of the universe you left behind. If you were to turn your gaze away from the crushing darkness below and look out the viewing port toward the distant stars, the sheer violence of time dilation would unfold before your eyes in reverse. Because your local time is running so incredibly slow relative to the outside world, you would perceive the rest of the universe running in an extreme, terrifying fast forward. The flat, safe space-time far above you is processing time at a highly accelerated rate compared to your localized crawl. The slow, majestic dance of the cosmos would become a frantic, blinding blur of chaotic energy. You would watch the planets of distant solar systems whipping around their parent stars like angry swarms of insects. You would see enormous, long-lived stars burning through their nuclear fuel at a terrifying pace, shifting from brilliant blue to bloated red, and finally detonating in brilliant flashes of supernovae, all within the span of a few deep breaths inside your cabin. The gentle, million-year processes of nebulae collapsing and forming new stellar nurseries would play out like a time-lapse video set to maximum speed. The universe outside your window is furiously aging, evolving, and dying, while you sit suspended in a localized bubble of extremely compressed time. This visual bombardment serves as a cold, mechanical confirmation that return is no longer physically or chronologically possible. Even if you possessed an impossibly powerful engine, capable of halting your descent and pushing you back up the steep gravitational slope against the crushing weight of the black hole, the universe you would return to would not be the universe you left. The simple act of spending a few hours hovering at the precipice of the event horizon ensures that hundreds, thousands, or even millions of years have elapsed in the outside world. The civilization that built your ship would likely be dust. The people who waved goodbye would have been dead for millennia. The political boundaries, the languages, the very arrangement of the constellations in the sky would be unrecognizable. Gravity has not merely pulled you across physical distance, it has forcibly dragged you into the deep, distant future, offering no method of traveling back. You have become a temporal ghost, entirely disconnected from the chronological chain of cause and effect that governs the rest of existence. Time, the invisible river that humans once believed flowed evenly and absolutely, has pooled around you, stagnant and heavy, trapping you in a microscopic sliver of eternity, while the rest of creation races forward toward its ultimate end. The ultimate tragedy of the extreme gravitational abyss is not merely the violent destruction of physical matter, but the total and absolute fragmentation of truth. When a dying star, a fragmented planet, or a theoretical human vessel makes that final, doomed descent toward the absolute darkness, the universe does not witness a climactic, definitive plunge into the void. The mechanics of relativity strictly forbid the outside world from ever seeing the exact moment of crossing. To comprehend this bizarre optical denial, we must rigorously examine the physical struggle of the light attempting to carry the visual information away from the edge and back up to the safe, flat expanse of the cosmos. Light is the fastest and most enduring messenger in existence. Yet it is not immune to the exhausting mechanical toll of extreme gravity. Just as a physical projectile thrown upward from the surface of a planet continuously loses kinetic energy and slows down as it fights the gravitational pull of the mass below, a beam of light attempting to climb out of the steep, near-vertical gravitational well of a black hole must expend a massive amount of its intrinsic energy to escape. However, the fundamental laws of physics dictate a crucial difference between a physical projectile and a photon. Because the speed of light in a vacuum is a strict, unbreakable, universal constant, the light cannot simply slow down its velocity to compensate for the climb. It must always travel at exactly 299,792 kilometers per second, regardless of the gravitational resistance it encounters. If the light cannot physically sacrifice its speed, it is forced to sacrifice its energy through a different mechanical manifestation. In the physics of electromagnetic waves, the energy of a photon is directly dictated by its frequency and the physical tightness of its wave structure. High-energy light possesses a very tight, rapidly oscillating wavelength, which registers to human biological perception as vibrant blue or intense violet. Low-energy light possesses a much looser, elongated, and sluggish wavelength, appearing to our eyes as deep red. As the light reflecting off the descending vessel desperately climbs the sheer curvature of spacetime near the event horizon, it is relentlessly robbed of its energy by the downward pull of the singularity. Consequently, the physical wavelength of the light is forcibly and continuously stretched. This mechanical elongation of the light wave is a phenomenon known as gravitational redshift, and it serves as a slow, methodical erasure of the original visual data. If a distant observer floating in flat space were tracking a brilliantly white vessel falling toward the singularity, the color of that vessel would not remain stable. As the object sinks deeper into the steepening gravity well, the light carrying its image struggles increasingly to climb back out. The tight, highly energetic blue and green wavelengths are the first to be exhausted, their energy sapped by the gravitational drag, causing them to stretch and flatten. The visual appearance of the hull will slowly and inevitably shift across the color spectrum. The pristine white metal will transition into a sickly, jaundiced yellow. As the descent continues and the gravitational pull multiplies in intensity, the yellow will deepen into a heavy, dark orange and finally degrade into a bruised, ominous crimson. This gradual color shift is not an atmospheric trick or a lens flare. It is the literal, visual footprint of extreme gravity acting upon light itself. The distant observer is watching the physical exhaustion of the photons, the visible spectrum buckling under the weight of warped space. Simultaneously, the profound effects of time dilation inflict a horrifying cinematic distortion upon the physical movement of the vessel. From the safe perspective of the distant observer, the timeline of the falling object is grinding down to a microscopic, agonizing crawl. Because the localized rate of time for the falling vessel is slowing down exponentially relative to the outside universe, the visual updates being broadcast back to the observer become increasingly delayed. We can understand this by viewing the light not as a continuous beam, but as a rapid series of individual digital packets of information, akin to discrete frames of a film reel being sent outward to describe the ongoing journey. As the vessel drops closer to the critical mathematical boundary, the steepening spacetime demands a progressively heavier temporal toll on each successive frame. A frame of light emitted just a few thousand kilometers above the event horizon might take an extra day to climb out. A frame dispatched a few meters deeper into the well might take a century to reach the observer's telescope. The final frames of light, emitted at an absolute, microscopic hair's breadth above the point of no return, will take thousands, millions, or even billions of years to violently struggle against the curvature of space-time. Therefore, the distant observer will see the vessel approach the absolute boundary of the event horizon, but they will never actually witness the crossing. The closer the vessel gets to the mathematical edge, the slower its apparent motion becomes. It decelerates to a crawl, then to a microscopic creep, and finally, it appears to halt entirely. It becomes a frozen, static phantom, permanently pinned against the dark backdrop of the spherical shadow. The distant observer is not merely watching an object freeze. They are receiving the visual data of a single, fleeting microsecond of the vessel's localized time, violently stretched out and broadcast over an eternity of external cosmic history. Yet, this frozen illusion does not remain clearly visible to the naked eye. The gravitational redshift does not halt simply because the object appears to have stopped moving. The intense stretching of the wavelengths continues relentlessly. The deep crimson light shifts past the absolute limit of human biological perception, elongating into invisible infrared heat signatures. To an unaided human observer, the vessel would simply fade silently into the blackness of the void. If the observer utilized highly sensitive, advanced astronomical instruments capable of reading the lower electromagnetic spectrums, they would see the ghostly afterimage of the vessel stretching further into faint microwaves, and finally into long, incredibly weak radio waves. Furthermore, The sheer rate at which these photons are arriving at the telescope slows down drastically due to the time dilation, causing the overall brightness of the image to plummet. The frozen phantom becomes increasingly faint, an incredibly dim electromagnetic whisper taking longer and longer to climb out of the well. Mathematically, it would take a literal infinity for the very last photon emitted immediately prior to the crossing to reach the outside observer. Therefore, the frozen, fading afterimage of the object will theoretically linger on the edge of the abyss, growing infinitely dimmer and infinitely redder until the final heat death of the universe itself. This haunting optical mechanics forces a profound and deeply unsettling philosophical confrontation regarding the absolute nature of physical reality. The universe, in the presence of an event horizon, is violently split into two entirely valid, yet utterly contradictory, historical timelines. For the doomed traveler inside the vessel, the experience of time remained totally unbroken and fluid. They did not experience themselves freezing in place. They did not witness their own hands fading into red and infrared light. From their localized, internal frame of reference, they plummeted straight across the event horizon in a matter of standard, measurable seconds, slipping past the point of no return and continuing their rapid, fatal plunge toward the crushing singularity waiting in the dark below. They experienced the absolute physical end of their existence in real, finite time. They crossed the threshold and were destroyed. However, for the distant observer, that crossing fundamentally never occurred. In the external reality, the traveler is eternally suspended at the threshold, trapped in a permanent state of suspended animation, slowly fading into the cosmic background noise over the span of entire galactic epochs. The deeply disturbing conclusion drawn from the mathematics of general relativity is that neither perspective is an optical illusion, and neither perspective holds the claim to absolute objective truth. The universe simply does not possess a master timeline, a central clock, or an ultimate referee to declare which historical reality is the correct one. The fluid structure of space-time permits these two contradictory histories to physically coexist simultaneously, precisely because they are forever separated by the absolute one-way barrier of the event horizon. Information from the inside reality can never, under any circumstances, travel back outward to correct the discrepancy or update the external universe on the fate of the traveler. The universe effectively censors the death of the falling object, permanently protecting the outside observer from witnessing the breakdown of physical laws that occurs within. The frozen, fading phantom plastered across the invisible sphere of the event horizon serves as a monumental cosmic tombstone. It is a holographic recording of the final, agonizing moments before the object was permanently severed from the chronological flow of the wider cosmos. The implications of this temporal shattering extend far beyond a single, hypothetical vessel. This exact physical mechanism applies to every single piece of matter, every stray asteroid, every collapsed star core, and every massive cloud of interstellar gas that has ever been drawn toward the abyss since the dawn of the cosmic dark ages. When humanity aims its most powerful radio telescope arrays at the supermassive black holes anchoring the centers of distant ancient galaxies, we are not merely looking at a clean, empty void or a simple point of mass. We are looking at a crowded, nearly infinite graveyard of frozen ghosts. The event horizon of every black hole in the universe is densely plastered with the fading, infinitely red-shifted after-images of absolutely everything that has ever fallen into it, all locked in a state of perpetual, agonizingly slow descent. The black hole wears the smeared, stretched, and distorted history of its own violent consumption on its outer edge, like an invisible tapestry of delayed light that will never quite finish its journey. The universe outside this boundary continues to move forward, relentlessly building new spiral galaxies, igniting fresh stellar nurseries, and expanding ever outward into the cold, empty dark, while the matter hovering at the absolute edge of the horizon is firmly and permanently trapped in a past that physically refuses to end. Causality itself, the fundamental law of cause and effect that builds the logical foundation of our existence, is stretched to the breaking point, leaving behind only an optical echo of a timeline that has long since been consumed by the dark. Long before the bizarre optical illusions of frozen time can fully play out for a distant observer, a far more immediate and visceral physical reality asserts itself upon the matter actually making the descent. While the human mind is naturally captivated by the philosophical implications of time slowing down and timelines fracturing, the fabric of spacetime consists of two inextricably linked components. Time is merely one axis, space is the other. And while time is being stretched into an unrecognizable infinite crawl, the physical space itself is being weaponized by the sheer, crushing mass of the singularity below. The laws of relativity do not merely toy with the hands of a clock. They exert a mechanical, tearing violence upon the very structure of matter. To comprehend this destruction, we must look at a force that governs the gentle rising and falling of the oceans on Earth. A force that, when amplified to a cosmic extreme, becomes the most efficient executioner in the universe. This phenomenon is known as the tidal force. On our home planet, the gravitational pull of the moon is not perfectly uniform across the entire globe. The side of the Earth facing the moon is physically closer to it, and therefore experiences a slightly stronger gravitational tug than the side facing away. This minute difference in gravitational attraction across the diameter of our planet is what pulls the massive bodies of liquid water outward, creating the daily rhythm of high and low tides. It is a gentle, almost imperceptible gradient of gravity, barely strong enough to shift water and slowly lock the rotation of moons over billions of years. However, a black hole does not possess a gentle gravitational gradient. Because it packs the mass of entire stars into a microscopic point, the curvature of space-time leading down to the singularity is not a slow, sloping valley. It is an incredibly steep, near-vertical abyss. As a physical object approaches this abyss, the difference in gravitational pull between its closest point and its furthest point ceases to be a subtle oceanic tide and escalates into a catastrophic, tearing shear. Consider the structural mechanics of a human body descending feet first toward the event horizon of a stellar mass black hole. In the normal, flat space of our everyday lives, the gravitational pull of the Earth on your feet is technically stronger than the pull on your head, simply because your feet are slightly closer to the center of the planet. Yet, the mass of the Earth is so relatively weak, and the distance of a human body is so infinitesimally small, that this difference is mathematically negligible. Your skeletal structure and muscular tissues easily withstand this microscopic variance without any conscious effort. But as you cross into the severe, tightly warped geometry surrounding the black hole, this negligible difference multiplies by millions, then billions. The gravitational slope becomes so incredibly steep that the distance of a mere 2 meters between your feet and your head becomes a fatal spatial chasm. The pull acting upon the soles of your feet becomes exponentially stronger than the pull acting upon the crown of your head. Simultaneously, because all gravitational trajectories in this warped space converge precisely upon the single microscopic coordinate of the singularity, the sides of your body are subjected to a violent horizontal compression. You are being pulled violently downward, but you are also being crushed violently inward. Astrophysicists, with a rare touch of dark descriptive humor, refer to this gruesome mechanical process as spaghettification. It is a whimsical word assigned to an absolute physical horror. The structural integrity of the human body, or indeed the titanium hull of a spacecraft, is maintained by the electromagnetic forces binding molecules and atoms together. These forces have evolved to withstand the standard pressures of planetary environments. They are utterly defenseless against the localized tearing of the space-time fabric. As the descent continues, the tidal forces rapidly outpace the mechanical strength of solid matter. The structural beams of a ship would groan, buckle, and snap like dry twigs. For a biological organism, the process is an absolute, systematic dismantling. The intense vertical stretching and horizontal squeezing would first overpower the connective tissues, ligaments, and the calcium lattice of the skeletal structure. The body would be forcibly elongated into a thin, agonizingly stretched ribbon of biological material. Yet, the destruction does not halt at the macroscopic level. Gravity, in this extreme environment, is not satisfied with breaking bones or crushing metal. It is actively dismantling the fundamental building blocks of the universe. Once the macroscopic structure is destroyed, the tidal shear continues to escalate, driving deeper into the microscopic realm. The severe gravitational gradient reaches the cellular level, easily rupturing cell membranes and tearing apart the delicate, complex proteins and helical strands of genetic material. The fundamental chemistry of life is simply deleted. But the abyss demands more. As the remnants of the matter are dragged closer to the crushing center, the difference in gravity across the diameter of a single molecule becomes overwhelmingly powerful. The electromagnetic bonds holding individual atoms together in a chemical structure are violently snapped. The material is reduced to a chaotic, swirling stream of individual, disconnected atoms, stripped entirely of their chemical identity and history. Water is no longer water. Iron is no longer iron. At the absolute edge, just before disappearing into the unobservable mathematical point of the singularity, the gravity achieves its final, ultimate victory over the forces of quantum mechanics. The tidal forces become so unimaginably intense that they tear across the subatomic distance of an individual atom. The powerful electromagnetic force that binds negatively charged electrons to their positively charged nucleus is effortlessly overridden. The electrons are ripped away, creating a violent, screaming plasma of bare, dismantled atomic cores. Even the strong nuclear force, the most powerful fundamental force in nature, which holds protons and neutrons together in the heart of the nucleus, eventually succumbs to the sheer, tearing geometry of warped space. Everything that once constituted a structured, physical object, whether it was a lifeless asteroid, a complex machine, or a breathing observer, is methodically shredded down to its absolute, most fundamental subatomic particles, stretched into a single, blindingly hot stream of raw mass, and fed directly into the crushing darkness. This mechanical annihilation of matter is not a theoretical abstraction. It is the mandatory toll exacted by extreme gravity, a violent physical dismantling that must occur before the rules of reality break down completely. The universe does not ask humanity to rely solely on theoretical mathematics or the abstract equations of general relativity to understand this immense violence. We have directly witnessed the brutal, mechanical reality of spaghettification playing out on a staggering cosmic scale. In the cold, high-altitude deserts of Earth, and the silent, frictionless vacuum of low planetary orbit, automated telescope networks continuously scan the dark expanses of the night sky, hunting for sudden, transient flashes of high-energy radiation. These robotic instruments do not sleep, nor do they blink. They silently monitor millions of distant, dormant galaxies, waiting for the exact moment when the sleeping gravitational giants residing at their centers finally awaken to feed. For decades, astrophysicists could only theorize about what it would look like if an entire star, a massive, burning sphere of plasma similar to our own sun, wandered too close to the event horizon of a supermassive black hole. They termed this violent theoretical encounter a tidal disruption event. The concept remained a terrifying mathematical abstraction until the sensitive optical and X-ray sensors of our modern observatories finally caught the blinding, undeniable flash of a cosmic execution in progress. Deep within the core of an otherwise quiet, unremarkable galaxy, hundreds of millions of light years away from our solar system, a sudden, furious eruption of ultraviolet and X-ray radiation violently pierced the deep cosmic dark. It was not the predictable, spherical explosion of a dying supernova, nor was it the steady, continuous burning of an established accretion disk. The light signature was unique, erratic, and undeniably violent. It was the exact optical footprint of a star being physically torn to pieces by extreme geometry. To truly understand the sequence of this cosmic destruction, we must trace the final, fatal orbit of the doomed star. For billions of years, the star existed as a perfect, self-sustaining sphere of nuclear fire. Its immense internal gravity held its hydrogen and helium fuel tightly together, perfectly balancing the outward explosive pressure generated by the furious nuclear fusion burning deep within its core. It lived in the dense, incredibly crowded environment of the galactic center, navigating a chaotic gravitational dance with millions of other stars in the dark. But over millennia of subtle gravitational nudges from its massive neighbors, the star was bumped onto a new, irreversible trajectory. Its orbital path gradually elongated, sending it on a slow, sweeping dive toward the central, supermassive black hole hiding in the core. As the star approached the periapsis, the absolute closest point in its orbit, it entered a region of space where the tidal forces of the black hole became the absolute dominant physical law. The gravitational pull exerted on the leading edge of the star, the hemisphere facing the abyss, suddenly became exponentially stronger than the pull exerted on the trailing edge. The star's own internal gravity, the fundamental force that had held its spherical shape together for billions of years, was simply and effortlessly overpowered. The burning sphere began to bulge, stretching violently toward the dark center. The delicate, perfect balance of nuclear fusion was instantly shattered. The physical destruction of the celestial body does not happen in a single, clean instant. It is a grueling, mechanical unspooling of an entire world. As the star crosses the critical mathematical threshold known to astrophysicists as the tidal radius, it is completely robbed of its spherical architecture. The massive body of the star is stretched into an incredibly long, thin, continuous river of superheated plasma. A star roughly 1 million kilometers wide is violently squeezed and elongated into a glowing, chaotic thread of material, stretching across millions of kilometers of empty space. This is the horror of spaghettification, occurring on a macroscopic, stellar scale. The sheer violence of this stretching acts as an enormous cosmic centrifuge. Roughly half of the star's total mass, the material situated on the extreme outer edge of the spatial distortion, is violently flung outward, successfully escaping the immediate grip of the black hole. This expelled stellar debris is ejected into the deep intergalactic void at a significant fraction of the speed of light, a massive spray of cosmic shrapnel serving as a silent, expanding monument to the shattered star. But the remaining half of the star is not so fortunate. It is deeply and permanently gravitationally bound, captured perfectly by the warped geometry of the abyss. This captured river of stellar material does not immediately fall straight down across the event horizon. Instead, it is whipped around the back of the black hole in an incredibly tight, desperate orbit. Because the stream of gas is so heavily elongated, the leading edge of the glowing river completes its first chaotic orbit and slams violently into its own trailing edge. This cosmic intersection is a collision of unimaginable physical proportions. The continuous stream of superheated plasma crashes into itself at velocities approaching the speed of light. The sheer kinetic energy generated by this self-collision is instantly converted into raw, blistering heat. The temperature of the stellar debris spikes to tens of millions of degrees, causing the atomic structures to break down completely, igniting into a blinding flare of X-rays and extreme ultraviolet radiation. The material then forcefully spreads out, flattening into a tightly wound, glowing accretion disk, a swirling, violent vortex of stellar remains slowly draining down into the absolute dark of the event horizon. The flash of light generated by this initial collision is so overwhelmingly bright that for a brief period of time, it completely outshines the combined starlight of every other star in its host galaxy. It is this exact, piercing scream of high-energy light that travels across the cold, expanding vacuum of the universe for hundreds of millions of years, finally striking the delicate optical sensors of our telescopes resting on Earth. When astronomers quietly analyze the data from a tidal disruption event, they are not merely looking at an interesting astronomical anomaly in the night sky. They are looking at the absolute, undeniable proof that there is a strict physical limit to structure in our universe. Matter, no matter how incredibly massive, no matter how tightly bound by the fundamental forces of nature, cannot endure the extreme curvature of spacetime near a singularity. A star is one of the most powerful, resilient engines in existence, capable of burning steadily in the dark for trillions of years, yet it is dismantled and unspooled as effortlessly as a fragile thread pulled from a decaying garment. This observed, recorded reality solidifies the terrifying mechanical truth of the extreme gravitational well. It is an environment that actively enforces its own profound isolation by obliterating any physical object that attempts to cross its threshold. The matter is brutally ground down into raw, disorganized energy before it is even permitted to slip past the event horizon. We are left with a chilling realization about our own fragile existence. If the immense, crushing gravity of a supermassive black hole can effortlessly unravel a burning star and stretch it into a thin ribbon of glowing dust, the delicate biological architecture of a human being, or the titanium and steel construction of our most advanced spacecraft, would be completely erased from the physical universe without a trace. This ultimate destruction of the physical form paves the grim way for a transition even more profound and disturbing. Because once the physical matter has been shredded into subatomic particles and the point of no return is finally breached, the destruction of solid objects is entirely replaced by the destruction of the abstract laws that govern our reality. Inside the boundary, beyond the reach of the tidal forces that rip matter apart, the very concepts of space and time are forced to undergo a horrifying, irreversible metamorphosis. The exact moment of crossing the ultimate threshold is defined by a chilling, profound silence. There is no physical membrane to break, no sudden jolt of turbulence, and no blinding flash of light to warn the traveler that reality has been permanently severed. The event horizon is a mathematical ghost, an invisible demarcation line drawn upon the vacuum of space by the sheer power of gravity. To the remnants of matter slipping past this unseen boundary, assuming they could somehow survive the violent mechanical shredding of the tidal forces, the transition would appear deceptively smooth. Yet, the instant this microscopic, infinitely thin perimeter is breached, the fundamental contract that governs physical existence is violently and irrevocably rewritten. You leave the rational universe of cause and effect entirely behind, entering a domain where the foundational pillars of reality are crushed under their own weight. To truly comprehend the madness that awaits inside the absolute darkness, we must first carefully examine the rigid, unquestioned rules that have governed every single moment of your life up to this exact point. In the familiar flat space of the external universe, humanity enjoys a profound and comforting physical freedom. You possess the agency to move left or right, to climb upward toward the peak of a mountain, or to descend deeply into a valley. Space is a vast, open coordinate system that you can navigate freely, limited only by your biological energy and the technological engines you build. Time, however, is a relentless, one-way dictator. You are strapped firmly to the invisible conveyor belt of the present, constantly and forcibly dragged forward into the future at a steady, unyielding rate of 1 second per second. You cannot pause this progression, you cannot reverse the flow to correct a mistake, and you cannot step sideways into yesterday. We accept this temporal confinement, this total lack of chronological freedom, as the fundamental cost of existing in a physical universe. The moment you fall through the event horizon, the crushing weight of extreme gravity forces these two foundational axes of reality to completely collapse and swap their roles. The mathematics of general relativity, when pushed past this absolute boundary, reveal a reality so deeply unsettling that it thoroughly defies all biological intuition and human logic. Inside the perimeter of the black hole, the physical dimensions of space and the linear progression of time undergo a literal mathematical inversion. Time and space abandon their traditional functions, forcing the traveler to navigate a universe that has been turned completely inside out. Space, the open, navigable landscape you once knew, instantly loses its physical rigidity. It becomes fluid, shifting, and ultimately entirely meaningless as a directional tool. In the normal universe, if you travel from your home to a distant city, the home still exists physically behind you. You can simply turn your vehicle around and drive back through the space you just crossed. Inside the event horizon, the path that leads back upward to the safety of the outside cosmos, the very trajectory you just traveled to arrive in the dark, is no longer a physical direction located behind you. The immense curvature of gravity has fundamentally transformed that spatial direction into the past. Just as you cannot build a physical machine on Earth capable of traveling back to the year 1999, you cannot build a rocket engine powerful enough to push your vessel back toward the event horizon. The exit door is no longer located behind you in physical space. It is firmly locked behind you in time. It has become a historical event that has already concluded, a moment in your timeline that has permanently expired. Conversely, the radial direction pulling you downward, the physical trajectory aiming directly toward the infinitely dense point of the singularity at the core, ceases to be a location in space. The singularity is not a dark, physical pit waiting patiently at the bottom of a deep cave. It is not a solid object resting at a specific set of coordinates that you are falling toward. The intense warping of the space-time fabric transforms the singularity into your inevitable future. It becomes a fixed, unavoidable moment in time. This represents the ultimate, inescapable horror of the black hole interior. In the normal, flat universe, tomorrow is going to arrive regardless of your actions or your desires. Whether you run in terror, hide in the deepest bunker, or stand perfectly still, the sunrise of the next day is a temporal inevitability. The future rushes toward you, and you are powerless to step out of its path. Inside the event horizon, the singularity becomes your absolute tomorrow. Because gravity has bent the fabric of reality so severely that space itself is flowing inward faster than the speed of light, every possible path, every conceivable direction you could point your vessel, leads directly into the future. And the future is the singularity. We can visualize this terrifying geometric collapse by examining the behavior of light itself within the void. If you were floating inside the event horizon and activated a powerful flashlight, attempting to shine a beam of light in various directions, the results would shatter your understanding of physics. In the outside world, light travels outward in a rapidly expanding sphere, illuminating the space around you. Inside the black hole, the gravity is so overwhelmingly dominant that it drags the light inward. Even if you point the flashlight directly upward, aiming exactly at the event horizon you just crossed. The beam of light will bend back upon itself, arcing violently downward toward the center. The light cannot move upward because upward is the past, and light must always travel into the future. Therefore, the darkness literally closes in around you, not simply because there is an absence of stars, but because the physical geometry of your environment forbids light from traveling anywhere except toward its own destruction. If you were to panic in the face of this oppressive darkness and ignite the most powerful propulsion thrusters ever engineered by human hands, pointing your exhaust directly at the singularity in a desperate, violent bid to slow your descent, your efforts would not simply fail, they would actively betray you. Because all spatial directions now point exclusively toward the future, the energy you expend does not push you away from the center. It only accelerates your movement through the warped timeline. By struggling against the gravity, by firing your engines and fighting the descent, you are merely pressing down heavily on the accelerator of time, rushing toward your final, crushing destination with even greater speed. The mathematics governing this twisted realm offer a deeply grim paradox. The most efficient way to prolong your existence inside this dark prison is to completely and unconditionally surrender. You must shut down your engines, allow yourself to enter a state of total, passive freefall, and let the corrupted timeline carry you forward at its own unyielding baseline pace. Resistance is not merely futile, it is temporally fatal. The loss of spatial freedom is complete, absolute, and suffocating. You are permanently trapped in a collapsing, shrinking geometry where the entirety of the universe has been brutally reduced to a single, inescapable temporal endpoint. The reliable laws of physics, the exact same equations that aerospace engineers use to build planetary rovers and astronomers use to chart the birth of galaxies, begin to violently break down the closer you draw to the end of time. The framework of general relativity requires a continuous, smooth fabric of spacetime to function and provide logical answers. But as you approach the final moment of the singularity, the curvature of the fabric steepens until it approaches absolute infinity. At this ultimate juncture, mathematics itself shatters. The foundational variables used by physicists to describe mass, density, and the force of gravity begin to spit out impossible, infinite results. The equations collapse into chaotic nonsense, signaling that human knowledge, human logic, and the very rules that govern the cosmos have reached their absolute final edge. The universe simply ceases to make sense. In this terminal domain, the concept of a physical location is permanently deleted. The question of where you are is replaced entirely by the question of when you will end. You are no longer moving through a physical void. You are helplessly falling through the rapidly tearing pages of the calendar of your own abbreviated existence. The intense, suffocating isolation of this final journey is absolute, because no light, no radio signal, and no shred of physical information can ever travel backward against the inverted flow of time to breach the event horizon. You are permanently severed from the rest of the cosmos. The universe you left behind will never know what happens to you in the dark. You will never be able to report back on the collapse of physics or the terrifying reality of the space-time inversion. You have become a silent secret kept entirely by the architecture of extreme gravity, falling quietly toward a profound mathematical error at the end of time, waiting to be crushed into the infinite, unknowable dark. The violent distortion of space-time, waiting at the edge of the abyss, forces a profound dismantling of everything we consider real. We have built entire civilizations, written meticulous histories, and define the fundamental human experience upon the rigid, comforting assumption that time is an untouchable, universal constant. Yet, the physical evidence scattered across the dark expanse of the cosmos suggests that our biological perception is incredibly narrow. We are fragile entities, evolved to survive within a gentle, flat, three-dimensional environment, heavily insulated from the true, malleable architecture of the greater universe. When the immense, concentrated weight of a collapsed stellar core can physically seize the flow of time, stretching a single fleeting hour into an entire epoch of planetary history, we are left to question the very foundation of our localized existence. If gravity can effortlessly shatter the clock, and extreme mass can physically swap the navigable directions of space with the inevitable, one-way march of the future, then the reality we experience every day might be nothing more than a temporary, localized illusion. The anomaly of the event horizon does not merely consume physical matter. It consumes the absolute certainty of classical physics. It stands as a silent, rotating monument to the absolute limits of human knowledge. A dark perimeter where our most trusted mathematical equations collapse into chaotic infinity, and the concept of a shared present is permanently deleted. We are left looking from a safe distance at the glowing rings of superheated plasma, the frozen, infinitely red-shifted phantoms of shattered stars, and the mathematical voids that thoroughly defy all biological logic. These extreme phenomena do not offer comforting answers, nor do they provide neat scientific resolutions. They simply suggest that eternity might not be an infinite, unending measure of passing seconds, but rather a physical location, a deeply fractured coordinate hidden behind a perfect, flawless shadow, where time itself has fundamentally ceased to flow. The universe carries no obligation to make sense to the human mind. It merely presents the darkness, leaving us to look upward from our tiny, rotating rock, bound completely by our fragile ticking clocks, and wonder what other absolute truths are quietly breaking down just beyond the edge of our sight.